ball filled with gunpowder with a fuse in it. And you would cut that fuse to a certain length and fire the cannon in somewhat of a high arc so that that fuse would explode the shell when it got over the heads of the enemy. But that's pretty tricky, and it didn't actually work that well. But it was designed to intimidate the Indians. It was made small. It could be taken apart, packed on a pack horse, transported that way through the wilderness. Now the 3-pounders that they had were a bit bigger, and you can see those in the other display here, showing the British Army as it's coming up again in the early morning, pre-dawn darkness. And the 3-pounder, this is an original tube, but the rest is reproduction. We think they were on sleds, because remember this was winter, there was snow on the ground, and they also brought these across the ice on the Detroit River to get them here. Behind it is a typical infantryman with a brown bess musket. Artillerymen, you'll notice that these guys are much better dressed than the Americans. They were equipped with wool coats, which was a good thing because the night before the battle, these guys camped out in the snow with no tents or anything, just laying in the snow. Behind them is one of the Canadian volunteers. He kind of represents, he looks young, and we know that the youngest battle participant that's recorded was 14 years old. He was a Canadian volunteer that came along with the artillery. And of course his dad, his family didn't want him to go with the army. He was too young, but he went anyway. And of course what happens to him? He gets shot in the knee, and they carry him back to the aid station, and he's crying, not just because it hurts, but the assistant to the surgeon was his father. So he did die of that wound a couple of years later, one of the long-term victims of the war. Behind me is our Native American representative. He's fairly generic in the way he's dressed. He's maybe a little too fancy for fighting in the battle. He's got a lot of beadwork on and stuff, but we couldn't resist doing the designs. And he's carrying a trade gun, a trade musket, which is a smaller caliber, a lot lighter to run through the woods with. He's wearing a capote, as was demonstrated in the other room. And instead of a toque, though, he's got a headscarf or a turban that was very common for Indians to wear in this area, to wear turbans with feathers in them. This exhibit was one that gave us probably more trouble than any others. When we first put it in, it was winter, and we put some brush in the bottom of it to make it look a little more realistic that we got out of the field next door. Well, in the spring, a whole bunch of bugs hatched out of that. They crawled up inside the mannequin. And so people would be standing here, and we'd hear somebody yell because a bug would come out his nose. And there used to be a loose board that if you stood on it, it would make his nose ring move like he's breathing. And whenever anybody tried to take a picture of him, the image would be cloudy. No matter what the camera was, it ended up as a cloudy image. So we figured that this was haunted. But after about a year, he began to behave. But there were a lot of Indians in the battle, and really credit for winning the battle for the British really goes to the Native Americans. There are as many as maybe 11 different tribes represented. The main ones were the Wyandots, the Delawares, Mingos, Ottawas, Potawatomis, Ojibwas. May have even been some Creeks up from Alabama that were in this battle. So it was a huge success for Tecumseh's Confederation of Tribes, one of their major victories. I'm going to give you a few moments just to look at these things and also